Welcome to this episode of Agile for Agilis. I am one of your hosts, Brad Nelson, and with me as always is my partner, Drew Podwell.
Hey, how you guys doing?
So, an early trend in our podcast has been talking about how the past has affected us as Agilists. And in our first episode, Drew introduced himself and talked about his background. And one of the things that came up that I find very interesting is his military background. And I think that we tend to think of the military as being very anti-agile and the opposite of agility. And I would say like management 3.0 and kind of these newer practices that we're promoting. And so I'm curious, Drew, if your experience in the military was anti-agile, would you say?
So, yes, no, maybe, right? There's a lot of different ways to look at it, right? So there's definitely toxicity within the military, right? From a leadership perspective. They teach you to kind of like look for the weak person on the totem pole and, bully that person as a way of groupthink, right? But on the healthier side of the spectrum, there's definitely leadership over management that is baked into the core
Mm-hmm.
of the military background. They develop us, right? Like, so I joined the Navy. I never worked on I was an aviation electrician. I never worked on autopilot systems. I never worked on night vision goggles before. And they developed me to be able to be proficient at that and become more proficient over time. And, there was cross functionality that occurred as well because I initially wasn't qualified to work on night vision goggles, but I thought they were really, really cool. Like, who wouldn't think working on night vision
Of
goggles was really
course.
cool?
Super
And
cool.
and so I hung out with the person whose job it was and who was qualified to work on them. And then when that person left, it became my responsibility. Even though I wasn't technically qualified from a training background, I was still able to work on them and service them. So the short answer is yes, no, or maybe, right? But
Mhm.
within the healthy side of leadership in the military, the answer is most definitely yes.
Awesome. Interesting. So you mentioned that they gave you the opportunity to learn. Would you say that they taught you the learning mindset, or was it just learn this one thing and just do this one thing forever?
No, absolutely. Right. And like early in my career, I realized that I hadn't gone back to college and I wanted to leave a job and get another job and leave a job and get another job. And early in my career, what I sold myself as, right, was I said, I never learned how to work on night vision goggles or stuff like that when I was in high school, right? But the military taught me how to do that, right? And my first job out of the Navy was in semiconductors. And they hired me because they knew the military taught me how to be a troubleshooter, right? They taught me how to be quantitative and
Mm-hmm,
qualitative and
hmm.
analytical. And, here's a problem that's in front of me. And what's my hypothesis for how to fix this thing? And let's try it. Let's see if it worked a little bit or if it didn't work at all. And let's, change directions. And so absolutely, like that's core to the military background is being that kind of troubleshooter.
That's very interesting that you classify it as a troubleshooter because I think, especially because of media, movies, shows, we tend to think of the military as order takers, right? Just don't think, just do what I tell you to do. Don't question it.
Yeah, there is definitely some of that, right? Like when it comes to general housekeeping, right? Today's the day that we're going to clean up the barracks, right? Like the low man on the totem pole definitely gets the worst job and, and it gets incrementally better, the higher up that you get in rank and whatnot. But when it comes to actually doing the job that you're doing in the military, right? Or at least from my experience, that wasn't the case at all. You're being given problems to solve. And they
Mm-hmm.
teach you how to look at things and come up with that hypothesis. So, like, actually, so here's a good example, right? So, I didn't work for squadron, right? Which meant that, like, I didn't work on planes. I worked on the black boxes that came off the planes. And so, in the systems that I was qualified to work on, there's like 9, 10, 12 different black boxes that make up that whole system. And so when an amplifier comes into the shop because the squadron has troubleshot the system and said, we believe this is the problem, it's the amplifier, and we get the amplifier, we have test benches that mimic the other boxes that are in the system. And now we've put this amplifier in it and we connect it, but we have it open, and we're making minute changes to see, all right, does this make it better? Does this make it worse? Right? We're probing for voltage. We're taking resistance readings and things like that. And so, you get this thing that it's not working, right? Or at least they say it might actually, there were times where I would plug it in. I was like, nope, this thing works, right? It passes all the tests with
Mhm.
flying colors. That wasn't usually the case. But, we're getting this thing with an unknown fault in it usually. And we're just trying to figure out what that fault is. And, there were times like, so when I was out at sea on the John C. Stennis, like there'll be times where they've got a plane that's like loaded up on the catapult and like getting ready to go, and they do the final checks and they realize like there's a fault in the system, and they don't want to take the plane down. They don't want to take it off the catapult. So they remove that part and they come running downstairs with it. And everybody, the air boss knows about this. Everybody knows that now, Petty Officer Podwall has this box and he's going to try and fix it. In those moments, it's like really like stressful, right? But that's like few and far between.
That
Those, that's not like run of the mill. Run of the mill, we're downstairs and below flight decks, and we've got boxes that come in, and there's a general pace of things that allow you to just kind of like explore to try to figure out what the problem is. So
they, they don't just have another box they can swap in while you fix the first one.
well, okay, so usually they do, right? Usually they do, but sometimes if it's a part that breaks frequently, and or maybe there's a fault somewhere else on the plane that's causing that box to blow, and they've replaced the box, and now that the amplifier is blowing again, and so they replace with another amplifier, and it's the last one. So the worst thing that what they want is they want you to figure out what the problem is, fix it quickly, bring the box back upstairs, plug it in, test it, and launch the plane off the bow of the ship. Kind of like with the andon cord, right? Like if you
Mm-hmm.
get this box and you look at it and you like know right away, yeah, I'm not going to be able to do this within 15-20 minutes. Then they take the plane off the catapult and bring it down to the hangar for repairs, and they put another plane up on the catapult and the next ready aircraft, and they launch that one. So there is like that concept of the andon cord as well.
Interesting. Yeah. And so what you just described though is a test environment, a physical one, but that's something we use in software development all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing a bit of quality and development troubleshooting there that you could easily map that over to software.
Well, and not only that, like we do have a role, every workshop has the role of a QA inspector, right? And so after you're done doing your work, the QA person has to come over. Well, first, the work center supervisor, if I recall correctly, the work center supervisor comes over and verifies your work, right? And then the quality control inspector, I forget the title, but something like that comes over, and then they put their stamp on. And then only after that can it, either go back into the supply locker or go back to the plane. But funny story is that I went to aviation electrician school in Millington, Tennessee, just outside of Memphis. Once you go through the certain levels of training, then you go into the room where this system is, right? You've learned it in the books. Now you're going to go learn it. And they have like these huge monolithic, they look like just mainframes. And they've got the whole aircraft system, drawn on it, and there's places where you can probe, and there's places, where you could take readings and whatnot. And your instructor programs a fault into the system. And then you come into the room and you've got to troubleshoot it and figure out the fault. And if you, let's say if you probe for resistance on a live wire, at the top is a big, huge flashing light, right? Like on the top of a police car, and a siren. And it just suddenly the cherry starts, flashing and strobing, and a siren goes off, because you can't probe for voltage or for resistance with a live circuit. You'll blow your amp meter and do damage, right? So, but yeah, they've got these full systems and they program different faults into them so that you can practice and learn along the way.
That's interesting. Yeah. Can you imagine in software development if you had a company that had their product and they programmed in faults so that people could learn and troubleshoot it?
Wait, have you heard of Chaos Monkey and Chaos Gorilla before?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Yep.
I mean, that's really what that is. It's Chaos Gorilla, I think there's like a data center where they program a fault into like one of the servers. And it's
Mhm.
and hopefully the monitoring systems catch it, right? That's the first part of the test. And then once it catches it, then everybody's got to swarm to try to figure it out and implement a fix and test it and put it into production, and then that fault gets cleared. But Chaos Gorilla, for those who don't know, is Netflix will actually take out and they'll program a fault into an entire data center that takes a regional data center down and then forces everybody to come together and swarm on it. So, we do that a lot in the military as well. Like, I wasn't involved in that kind of training too much, but like once or twice a day, you would hear over the loudspeaker on the aircraft carrier while we're underway, like in the Persian Gulf, in a theater of combat,
Mhm.
right? You would hear like fire in main reactor room, away the reactor team. And, you would turn white for a second because you're on a nuclear powered aircraft carrier and there is now a fire in the reactor room. And 5 minutes later, you hear over the 1MC, reactor team is on station. Right. And then 5 minutes later or 10 minutes later, like there's another announcement that is akin to, they've commenced firefighting or whatever. And then maybe like 30 minutes later, it's, the fire is now under control. And then maybe 10 minutes later, the fire has been extinguished. Right. And then like 5 minutes after that, it's fire in main reactor room number 1 has been fully extinguished. This is a drill. And they're conditioning you to react as if it wasn't a drill, right? Like now the people who show up in the reactor room to go fight the fire and, they see that there's, no flames, like they know it's not a drill at that point.
Right.
But the rest of us in the ship don't know that. we're only hoping.
Sweating bullets, losing some weight.
There's a great episode of This American Life with Ira Glass and I forget the other guy's name now, but they're on board the John C. Stennis a year after I was there,
Mm.
right? And they comment on that in the episode. The episode is called, I think, Life in the Arabian Peninsula or something like that. And like Ira Glass and God, I forget the other guy's name, but they wake up in a stateroom in the middle of the night because that announcement has just gone off, and Ira Glass has turned on the recorder. And they're like kind of clutching each other, like, what do we do? What do we do? And they protect. And I'm like, this is exactly how I felt when I was underway. So
Nice. So you mentioned Chaos Monkey, Chaos Gorilla. Those, my understanding, are programmed to attack random areas at an unknown time period in production.
I don't know. Is it random, completely random? Nobody's actually plugging in. Like, there's no like senior leadership who's like, all right, this is what we're going to do today, or is it just totally a random?
That is my understanding. And it's something, yeah, you mentioned Netflix. I believe Amazon also does something similar. It's a great way of building resiliency into your system.
Yeah.
So there's definitely, I think, value in that when your system is not going to kill someone, right? Randomly, like, oh, we're just going to randomly blow up a ship,
Yeah.
Um, so I could see in the military, though, right, like that quality in those sorts of drills may be a little bit more controlled, but where a lot of organizations struggle is with production quality in their test environments, like truly being able to test at a production level. And what I'm hearing is it sounds like the Navy is really good at that.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the military, law enforcement as well, right? Like law enforcement are doing live fire drills. Yeah. The thing that I find the most unnerving when I'm coaching is this idea of, okay, yeah, let's we've got in the backlog, work to be able to have an improved live test environment. But we don't want to work on that right now because, we've got too much to do. And it's like, well, okay, but if we do work on this, you'll be able to do more of that stuff in the future, right? And it's almost like the reverse of, there's like the reverse mindset of robbing Peter to pay Paul. Like in this
Hmm.
case, we do want to rob Peter to pay Paul, right? Because we're going to wind up richer in the future if we do this. Or maybe I'm getting the analogy wrong, but something along those lines, I think. So
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I get where you're going with it. I think that's a huge struggle that I see with organizations, or they're stuck in firefighting mode. And like, how do I ever develop anything new? Because I'm constantly fixing things.
yeah, and that's where like one of the things that I work with the organizations that I start coaching is I ask to see their backlog of tech debt, and 9 times out of 10 that just lives in either one person's head or more likely lives in lots of people's heads. So what I do in those instances is I say, all right, let's create a habit at the end of every sprint of
Hmm.
taking, account of any tech debt that we've either created by mistake or observed along our way, and let's just put it in a JIRA and document it, right? Like in an idealized world, like, you'll also get some time carved out to fix that at your, discretion, but let's start by at least documenting it so we can know where it is.
At danger of continuing us to spin off the topic,
Yeah.
you mentioned tech that is introduced by accident or observed. Is there ever a time to purposely introduce tech debt?
Well, I think that's like what we're talking about with creating a fire drill in the main reactor room, right? Where we're purposely creating like a significant level of tech debt. But I don't know. Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's the example that I can think of. Is there something that you're noticing that I'm not? Because I would love to learn.
uh, it's just it seems like another topic that's really common, especially in the firefighting mode where people get into like band-aid after band-aid after band-aid. They're like, well, we just gotta, it's a critical defect. Systems are down. We just have to band-aid it and get it back up. And then you just end up having, a mile long band-aid sticking out of someone's arm that's still seeping and gushing blood, and the band-aid's weighing them down and they can't move.
Yeah.
Was my visual for you all. um,
Well, there is another story. I don't know if that's along those lines. This I don't really have any experience with this at all, but there is and this is totally like right on the edge of PC. But there's a school called Goat School that field medics get sent to in the military. And what you do is you're out in the field and you're given a goat, an actual live goat, and you're supposed to take this goat from like waypoint to waypoint to waypoint to get it to its extraction point or something like that. Meanwhile, there's like some sort of like special operations guy that's out there, or woman that's out there as well, that's literally shooting your goat, right? That's trying to actively kill your goat, and it's your job to keep your goat alive. Total animal cruelty. Like, for anybody listening to this, like, I don't subscribe to this. I wouldn't ever like participate in it. But like, like if you think about like during Vietnam or World War II, like there is this need to have your medics be able to work in a live fire environment, right? Like if a medic gets sent to the field in a combat zone and has never like experienced a bullet flying over their head, they might not perform in the way that you need them to perform. And so that's what this school is just, and I don't know if it still exists. It might not exist anymore. It definitely existed back in the 90s when I was in the Navy, because I knew a few people who went to goat school. But did we take too dark of a turn, Brad? You could totally like pull me out of.
that's crazy. I'm like, I'm kind of speechless. I don't even know how to respond.
Yeah, I mean, they do the same thing with like air crew, right? Air crew go to a school called SEER School, Search, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape, I think it is. And you get dropped in the middle of a forest somewhere with only the things that you might have on you if you crash landed in a helicopter or a plane, right? So you've got like, parachute silk, and you've got the stuff that's in your flight bag and whatnot. And again, you have to get to the waypoint for extraction. Now, what they don't tell you is that once you get to the waypoint for extraction, you learn that that actually isn't a safe zone anymore, and you get captured, and you get to experience what it's like to be in a POW camp for a week, where they're actually
Well,
like they're like they're physically violent to you, and they're absolutely psychologically violent to you, right?
mhm.
Like they're not allowed to like do any like physical permanent damage to you, but it's and I had a couple of friends of mine who were air crew who went through that school. And now fortunately we're in software. I'm going to pull it back, right? Fortunately we're in software, and the worst thing that we might ever have to experience might be getting a paper cut from a post-it note while we're running an inspect and adapt event, or a weighted shortest job first workshop, or you know
Carpal tunnel.
yeah, carpal
Yeah.
tunnel, right? Maybe you get a little bit of a zap when you're trying to change your own RAM out of your laptop, by following
Hope not.
um but But like
Yeah.
there's definitely like this idea in the military of drilling, right? We drill and we
Hmm.
drill under as real conditions as we possibly can so that we can be prepared to deal with things as they arise. And the thing is, like, what Netflix gets and apparently what Amazon gets is that, yeah, by programming this random fault into a data center, we are taking away time that our developers can apply towards developing, valuable features that our customers are waiting on. But the value of having them swarm together under pressure forces them to improve their collaboration under stress, forces them to improve their, like, all right, what's our hypothesis, right? Okay, this is what I think it is. All right, well, let's go explore this and try it out, right? Forces them to be
Hmm.
quantitative. So, all right, is it working as well as we thought it was going to work? Maybe. All right, let's keep going. All right, maybe not. All right, let's come back to the drawing board and come up with another hypothesis. Another example along those lines is, I showed up to an accident once. I'm really good in emergency situations as a result of my training, right? I
Hmm.
showed up to an accident in the Berkshires once. There were like three cars on the side of the road, on a road that I used to travel all the time that I would never see a car on. And I stopped my car and I'm like, is everyone okay? And it turns out that there was a car that's like 60 yards into the woods. And the car had veered off the road and launched itself into the air. Like, the telephone pole, I now notice, is now cut in half, like 12 feet in the air. This car like launched, sheared through a telephone pole, flipped, and was in the woods. And so I'm like, well, has anybody gone back there to see if the person's okay? And they're like, we can't because there's too many prickers, right? So I'm the guy who now I I am now in charge, right? So because
Hmm.
I've realized nobody else is taking charge, I'm in charge. So I'm telling one person, go down the road to that house, call 911. This person, I'm like, all right, you stay here. I need to be able to communicate with you. I'm going in, and I go in. The person was in really, really bad shape. And so I find out that the police are on their way, emergency services are on their way. The first officer shows up, and now I realize I am no longer the senior person in charge of this. So
Hmm.
I am passing the baton to this person and giving them the information that they need to know in order to be the leader now. And I'm asking them, what do you want of me to support you? Right. And in that case, they asked me to go out. They were going to go into the woods and to, direct the fire crew and the emergency services back to where they are when they got there. Right. And at each step of the way, when somebody senior to me is showing up, I'm asking them, what can I do to be of service to you? Right. And so
Hmm.
in these kinds of situations where teams are swarming around a problem, maybe the architect is there, maybe the architect isn't there, right? Maybe the lead developer for the team is there, maybe they're not, right? But you have to figure out, like, who's in charge, what's the hierarchical leadership for solving this problem, and what is my role within solving this problem. And that's where leadership and teamwork really come to play, because is if everybody's able to put their ego aside for the person in the woods with a serious injury, then that person has a greater chance of living. If everybody can put their ego aside for when there's a fault for a server or something like that, then we have a greater chance of getting this production fix out there rapidly and not losing money for whatever system it is that's now offline.
Yeah. So you went where I actually had a no. I wanted to talk more about this because you brought it up the other day, and I find it very fascinating. You maybe took a little bit of a darker
I
kind of
know.
route there than I was expecting. Um, but you had mentioned that one of the things you had learned in the military was how to take control of the situation and let go of control when someone else comes in that obviously should have control. And that really got me thinking because I don't think that is something that we typically pick up on in your normal corporate America. I think, I mean, there is some like seniority. A director comes in, CEO, president. Yes, they're the big dog in the room. But a lot of times, once you're a manager, you kind of have that like, oh, I'm the boss, right? I'm the one in charge. I'm the one deciding, and you might not always be the leader of the situation or the best one to deal with the situation. So I thought that was very fascinating.
Yeah, where I saw it work really well was I was on a coaching engagement where there was probably about 6 or 7 coaches, right? And we were all kind of like in different areas of the organization, both broad left to right and hierarchically top to bottom, right? So there were some coaches that were primarily at the portfolio, some were primarily at the program level, some were predominantly like performance coaching the POs specifically, and then some were down at the team level and whatnot. The thing that worked really well in that engagement was that if a portfolio coach was having a challenge with trying to figure something out in our, weekly or maybe daily scrum, right, that we had together as coaches, that coach at the portfolio level would bring up this impediment that they're experiencing with coaching at that layer. And we all ideated. And what I saw a couple of times was, all right, that coach realizes, all right, Brad, you seem to have a really good, grasp on this solution. And we all agree that this is, the thing that we should try to deploy here. Why don't you come with me to the next portfolio meeting, right? Or whatever meeting it is, ceremony, event, one-on-one or whatever. And now, you're filling in and you're pinch hitting and you're assisting over there. But in a management world, it's like, okay, you're always going to be a team coach and you're always going to be a program coach and you're always going to be there.
Hmm.
And we've set this up because this person has the most experience up here. This person has the least experience down here, and neither the twain shall meet. That you're losing out on so much. As a general rule of thumb, like people with more experience in certain areas tend to have, a better grasp on things in those areas. But like to completely shut people out in that way isn't serving anybody. And so when I was underway and we would be working on parts, we would all pinch hit with one another, right? Like I would take interest in the systems that person was working on because I wanted to learn about it, and vice versa. And we all learned from each other. Another cool area that I became responsible for, and I totally weaseled my way into this, was planes have what's called an 8-day clock. And it's a really, really cool, like clock, like with hands on it, right?
Hmm.
And you wind it up and it will run it'll keep accurate time for 8 days, right? Now, but the thing is, anytime anybody gets into the cockpit of a plane, whether it's the pilot or it's some of the ground service crew or somebody else, they just love that knob. and and so even though the guy who sat there before wound it up all the way, somebody else is winding it and now it's overwound. And so I got to work on these clocks that had these tiny little ruby jewels in them and tiny little gears and springs and that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. And if I wasn't curious, I might not have ever had that opportunity, but maybe somebody would have pulled me over one day and said, hey, would you want to learn about this? But we all take interest in what the other one is doing.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a certain amount of vulnerability and I think psychological safety required to be able to say, I don't know, or I'm not the best person for this situation. And then there's also a certain amount of curiosity and I don't know, maybe even there's humanity in it of, having interest in your colleagues. What is it that you're doing? How can I support you? How can I learn a little bit of what you're doing? Maybe I'll love what you're doing more than I'm doing now. And it's an opportunity for me to switch fields. But if nothing else, how can I support you when you're overwhelmed? We talk about the cross-functional team. A lot of people think of cross-functional teams as being like every developer is full stack. It doesn't have to be, right? We just have to have the right skill sets within the team. But if each person only knows how to do one thing and that person's out or they get behind or you just don't have other work that sprint, what are the other people supposed to do?
Well, we talk about T-shaped teams
Hmm.
where we want people to have, broad knowledge, across a lot of the area, right? And deep knowledge, with some of the areas, right, that a team is working on. And we want like people to recognize that whatever your T looks like when you come in to a team, it should continue to evolve over time. But yeah, like the idea of everybody should know everything, like that doesn't work. That just can't work. Yeah, I like T-shaped teams, right? T-shaped people on
Hmm.
T-shaped teams.
Yes. Something else I've heard with the military is there's a strategy, right? Eisenhower's quote, there's a planning is valuable. The plan is worthless or something like that. I'm probably butchering it in a paraphrase, but the idea that there's this strategy and there's this plan going forward, but teams outside of the purview of the top officers are able to self manage and have some autonomy to respond to the situation based off of what they think is best. And that's interesting to me because that is a pretty big tenet, I think, of agility, is that decentralization. Right? And the need of having a strategy and a plan from senior leadership and a vision, but then also allowing and trusting your team once they're out in, we'll say, the field, uh, to make the right decision and do the right things.
Well, so I think it was after Vietnam, right? At least with the special forces units, they were given missions that were specific to the outcomes that that mission was designed to achieve. Right. So the example there that I've always heard, obviously, never been special forces, but um, if you're told that you've got to take, hill number Bravo Zulu 1 3 Tango Kilo, right? Then, that's the hill that you've got to take. And if when you get out into the field, you realize that it is absolutely unsafe to take that hill, we're going to incur a lot of casualties if we try to do that. During the Vietnam War, you just trudged up that hill because you were told to do that. The
Hmm.
shift after that was, it's not we need you to take that hill. It's we need you to take that hill because tomorrow morning at 0500 hours, we're going to be moving the platoon and the regiment up through this valley, and we need you to be able to provide overwatch. Right. So now when they get into the fields and they know that, all right, we got to take this hill is not safe for us to take. They know the reason why we're trying to take the hill is to provide overwatch. And so if they are now in the field and they are like, all right, we could provide great overwatch from this hill as well. And, as long as we also take this hill. And so let's divide the unit. And, you three are going to provide overwatch from this hill, and you three are going to provide overwatch from this hill. And now we've got good coverage over the valley. And now the platoon or regiment or whatever it is can march through that valley the next morning. So that's the shift, right? The shift is, and I know, like, not all soldiers know the outcomes for their missions, right? Like,
Hmm.
um, but but that's the big shift is that the special forces units are given complex problems to solve in order to create specific outcomes that enable the strategy to flow through the system. Right? I know that's
Hmm.
simplifying it in a software way, but much like if your teams are given outcomes and problems to solve, which is a feature written as a problem, as opposed to a highly architected solution, they're going to be able to see those hills that aren't safe within that feature, and be able to still achieve the outcomes for you. So, and it's a weird thing, right? Like it baffles me that organizations don't trust that, right? They don't
Hmm.
trust the idea of, wait a minute, I need to tell them exactly what they should be doing, right? Because otherwise they won't give me exactly what I want, right?
Right.
Versus I need to tell them the problem that I need for them to solve with the outcome that I'm trying to achieve, so that they can self-organize and innovate a solution. Maybe come up with an MVP that's a little bit more simple than the one that I might have come up with if I gave them a solution. So,
Yeah, and you touched on complex situations in lean change management. They talk about the difference between complicated and complex. And we love to use very similar words. I guess they're easy to remember, but they're confusing when we're explaining things. So you mentioned earlier fixing a watch. A watch is a very complicated mechanism, device. However, everything has a known place. We know where everything goes, even though it's very complicated, and therefore there's a set guidelines and rigor to what we have to do to create, build, repair a watch. Now, a complex problem is something where we don't know everything. We don't know everything up front. Right? There's not just one way to deal with this situation. And that's what software development is typically. Right? There's not just we just do this one thing every single time and we get this outcome. And I don't think it's like the technology is part of the challenge, but it's also the outcome we're trying to achieve, the problems we're trying to solve. And we don't know how our users are going to respond to this solution to that problem.
well,
And that's the power of agile, right?
yeah, and we also, like, we don't know how, like, so like the watch, right? Like, let's say yeah, if we wanted to create watches, we would just need to come up with an architecture design for a watch, and now it's a manufacturing process, right? But let's say we want to create
Hmm.
a brand new watch, the likes the world has never seen, one that is able to, predict my mood based on my astrological sign, as well as the astrological sign of the people who I'm engaged with, and be able to, signal to me when I'm pressing too hard, on a sales pitch, or need to lean back a bit, right? Like the world has never seen a watch like that, right? So we just need to come up with, well, what's our hypothesis here, right? Like what's the problem? What are the little problems that we want to be able to try to solve for? All right, well, the outcome that we're trying to achieve is we want to create a device that's going to indicate to the person wearing it that maybe they're being too aggressive in the conversation. And, all right, well, the hypothesis was that we're going to do that off of astrological sign, but maybe there's another way for us to, get a sample data on that doesn't have anything to do with astrological sign or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and now you got me thinking of a product for coaches, right? No, it's like we're building something the world has never seen before, or we're building a system, a suite of systems that this configuration the world has never seen before, right? And it's a journey. I was actually on a call last week. Your friend Mark was talking about empirical anecdotes, I think he called it, and this
Metaphors. Yeah.
metaphors, right? Um,
Yep.
Somebody was talking about how they were like, it was an open space about the topic of lean, and we wanted to
Hmm.
learn more about lean. The coaches that were on this call, and there was a coach who was very familiar with lean, and they said, the thing about lean is that, like, much like gardening books versus architecture books, if you read a book about architecture, the book is going to be titled after the architect, right? Whereas if you read a book about gardening, it's going to be the title of the book is going to be about the garden, or the context, or the geographic location, or the temperature, or whatever it is. It's not the gardener's name. And they said that lean is the same sort of way, right? If you read books about agile, usually they're tied to like big names, but lean books aren't. And it dawned on me, projects are like architecture, right? Projects are like building a house, because you build a house
Hmm.
and chances are you're going to move into it, and maybe you do maintenance, maybe the boiler blows and you got to replace the boiler, or maybe you put you take down the deck in the backyard and you put up a new deck with synthetic wood or whatever. But for the most part, when you buy a house, you're moving in and you're planning on living there for a while, right?
Hmm.
Product development in the digital world is more like building a garden, because with a garden, you've got to visit it on a daily basis. You got to look at the soil. You got to pick the soil up. You got to smell it. You got to feel it. What's the humidity of the soil? Got to look at the leaves. Are the leaves to my plants nice, bright, and green and broad, or are they curling? Are they curling up, or are they curling down? Because those have different meanings. I forget. One of them is like over fertilization, and one of them is something else. But then we started talking about this idea, right? And somebody said, well, in the garden metaphor, who's the product owner? And I was like, well, the gardener is the product owner. The people maybe at market are the customers, right? That might be one persona. Another customer persona might be your family. And we started really going on this analogy, and it is like developing a digital product is like cultivating a garden. Or the other analogy that somebody brought up after that is, I don't know if you've ever had like a real fish tank with like real live plants in it, right? Like
Hmm.
if you neglect the fish tank, it's going to turn green really, really fast, especially if there's live plants in it. You've got to balance the pH, you've got to balance the CO2 and oxygen, and the nutrients and all of that. And people want to believe that it's like building a house, and it's not. So,
Hmm. I like that. I'm gonna have to process that for a little bit, but
yeah.
yes, in fish, I'm sure a lot of people make the mistake of, oh, it's a fish. It's not a lot of maintenance until you get into the aquarium maintenance makes up for. any of the other maintenance?
I've had aquariums before. I had a CO2 tank that was connected to my aquariums, and I had a meter in there that would, gauge the level of CO2 in the water and would either slowly bubble CO2 or turn it off. People overstock their fish tanks; they overfeed their fish.
Hmm.
I'm sure like if we unpack that, there's going to be a lot of like analogies with overfeeding and like adding the wrong fish, right? Like would be like
Hmm.
adding the wrong feature. Like we think we want this feature, but it's the wrong feature for us to do. It's definitely sequence wise. So
And then it eats your other features.
eats your other features. Yeah.
Hate it when that happens.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely had fish that ate other fish, and it was like I wanted that fish in my tank more than I believed that was the wrong thing to do. You know, like I want to release this feature more than I believe that it's the wrong thing for us to do right now, and
Right.
that's where they go wrong. But we're totally off track
All
from a
right.
military perspective,
We
though.
are. Yes. Yep. Yep. So I was about to pull us back. One of kind of the last thoughts or questions I had for you is, we went kind of down the dark path. We touched on very briefly some of the toxicity from your time in the military. But what I've heard is that there was a known PR problem there, and supposedly they've addressed that. Supposedly the military has gotten nicer. And I'm curious if you feel, and I know you haven't been in since it's gone nicer or more Gen Z friendly or whatever we want to call it, but I'm curious, do you believe that this more mean, or I'll say cruel, version of the military that you went through had a benefit to it in the way you developed and in the way you interact today?
Um, God, there's so many ways to answer that question. But first of all, I'll say like the military supports the war machine, right? So there's only so nice that it can actually be, because at the root of it, you're enlisting people or whose job it is to either directly kill somebody or support the killing of somebody. Um,
Hmm.
you know, now the other side of that question is like, all right, the new Navy, the nicer Navy, right? Like, there's definitely a lot less hazing, right? And when I was in, we had the option to opt out of hazing, right? Like, um, um, and I opted in. I opted in. My grandfather was, I don't really come from a military family, but my grandfather was a gunner's mate in the Navy during World War II. And he just has great
Hmm.
stories. And like, I knew that like the hazing that I was a part of, nobody was getting hurt, right? Like, it was like right on the edge of like, you could get hurt. And because like, no, not everybody had to participate. And we respected those who didn't want to participate, right? But like for instance, when you cross the equator, in order to cross the equator, the ship has to stop and ask King Neptune's permission to cross into his royal domain. And so there's a ship crossing ceremony. I've got my coin right here. This is my shellback coin. And this still happens. Like it happens on cruise ships, it happens on merchant marine ships. It used to be that if you didn't ask King Neptune's permission, it was bad luck to cross the equator. And so all ships
Hmm.
stopped. And the thing is that if you'd never crossed the equator before, you're a dirty, filthy, slimy pollywog. Right. And if you have crossed the equator before, you're a right and trusty shellback. Right. And so on the day that you cross the equator, the shellbacks get to haze the pollywogs. Right. I got somebody crammed lard in my ear, right? Like actual like Crisco, like, and it was crammed in my ear so bad that I wound up with an ear infection, like, and not bad. I mean, I was able to like irrigate it, but it was a lot of fun, right? Like you sing all these stupid sea shanties, you climb through huge containers, like the containers that the jet engines get shipped in, like huge jet engines get
Hmm.
shipped in. A week before you cross the equator, the captain orders the galley to stop throwing the excess food overboard, and they fill up these aircraft containers, jet engine containers, and you got to swim to them or through them, right? So you're swimming through
Hmm.
rotten putrid, rotten food. But then at the
Ew.
end is King Neptune's court, and you bow in front of King Neptune, and like literally, like grown men and women sailors are dressed up like. I think it's the senior most enlisted sailor dresses up as King Neptune. And then there's the junior most enlisted sailor, and then the junior most enlisted officer are all dressed up as the members of the royal court. And when you finally get through the end of the day to the royal court and you ask their permission, and if they don't like you or you look at them wrong, they'll make you go back and do it again or whatever. But when you finally get through, you're bruised, you're covered in filth, but you feel like you are part of a team, and not just the
Mm-hmm.
team of the people who are doing this with you today, and not just the team of people of the now you're a shellback, right? So not just a team with the other shellbacks on the ship, but like I have a photo album of my grandfather's shellback ceremony, and I felt this connection with him as a result. Now back then they got hurt; they really hurt people. You know, um,
They're hardcore.
I don't believe, it's so hard to say, like toxic hazing where people actually get hurt, like can get really hurt, where people don't have a choice to participate or not, where people are absolutely humiliated for the sake of knocking them down and brutally humiliating them, absolutely wrong. Right. But like
Mm-hmm.
what we did was really kind of fun and games. Nobody came away from there like, at least I don't think anybody came away from there broken, like totally broken. So I think my headset,
Mm-hmm.
I think my battery
Yeah.
just died on my headset, actually. I'm
Uh-oh.
not sure.
So does that mean you can't hear me at all?
No, I could hear you. Oh, so I guess my
Oh,
battery didn't die
okay.
on my headset. Something like,
Yeah.
anyhow.
All right.
Um,
So
but there's one thing
we're pretty much.
I do want to bring up one more thing, right? Like, I always describe being in the Navy like being on a road trip with your friends from college, right? And you've got like,
Mm-hmm.
you're in a car, the car is now broken down, you have no idea what's wrong with it. It's 105 degrees outside. You've got a collective total sum of like $35.73 to everybody's name. It really sucks. But there's a case of beer in the back of the car. You're there with all your best friends. And no matter how much it's going to suck, it's going to make for an amazing story that, 20 years later, when you get out of the Navy, 30 years later, when you get out of the Navy, you're going to be able to share with your shipmates and be like, remember that time we were driving across country? Like it's really bonding. So, um,
Mm-hmm.
but the last thing that I want to say in closing is that if you're looking to hire a scrum master, please consider looking to hire somebody with the military background. Please consider looking for a veteran. It's not very difficult to go on LinkedIn to, put some of the keywords in if you're a recruiter and search for somebody, with a scrum master background and a military background, right? Or somebody with a leadership military background, right? And if you don't know how to do this, reach out to me. If you're a recruiter and you're wanting to hire more veterans, I used to be the co-chair of HBO's Veteran Employee Resource Group, and I worked with HR there to improve the number of veterans that we were hiring. And the thing is, they had no idea how to do that. Like they had no idea how to tweak,
Mm-hmm.
what to search for to hire veterans. Veterans make amazing leaders. Veterans know that if they're showing up on a scene of something, am I in charge or are you in charge? And if I'm not in charge, how can I be of service? They're great at that. So if you're looking to hire a scrum master or you're looking to expand the number of veterans in your company, definitely reach out to me. And I would love to help with that.
Hello at agileforagilists.com.
Yeah.
It's a direct line in.
Yeah. And if you're a
Um,
veteran and you're looking to become a scrum master, right? Or you're looking to learn about Agile, right? I have open office hours, unlimited open office hours for veterans. So if you're a veteran and you're listening to this, it doesn't matter if you got out 20 years ago and you're senior already in your career. If you want to know more about this, I have unlimited open office hours for veterans.
awesome. That's very generous. And you do volunteer work actively with veterans, correct?
I do. Yeah. In fact, this Friday is fallen.org is having a hackathon that's starting early evening East Coast time. I forget what it actually is, the hours, but I can get it for you. So It's a great hackathon. It'll be, I think, my third or fourth that I've participated in. It's just really cool. There's lots of like the veterans who are like, usually they're in coding boot camps right now, right? Lots of veterans who are just
Mhm.
like, they just got out of the military. They've got lots of money in their pocket to spend on education, and they're interested in software development. And so if you're looking for veteran developers, this is a great resource as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Agile for Agilis. We support our veterans. We love you. Thank you for your service. Thank you, Drew. Anything else that you want to mention? I know we're a little over, but anything else you want to mention in closing?
Oh, wow. I wasn't prepared for this. I used up my thing that I wanted to mention in closing earlier, Brad. Just thank you so
It
much.
was a good one.
Thank
It was
you.
a good one.
Yeah. Uh,
Th- Thank you for sharing, Drew. I appreciate it. And I know our listeners will too.
awesome.